Welcome back to the Deep Dive. You know the mission. We dig into the sources, cut through the complexity, and get you quickly up to speed. Today, we're tackling something big, biological invasions. It's a huge global issue, really accelerating.
It absolutely is, and it's driven by, well, basically how connected everything is now through trade and travel.
With a massive cost attached.
Oh, yeah. We're diving into a really important new paper today. It's led by Armin N. Pili, and it's called Forecasting Potential Invaders to Prevent Future Biological Invasions Worldwide.
Yeah.
And the stakes are incredibly high. If you just look at amphibians and reptiles, the herpetofauna the paper mentions costs upwards of US $17 billion between 1986 and 2020.
17 billion just for frogs and lizards and snakes. That's staggering. It really tells you reacting after the fact isn't the way.
No, it's a losing battle. It gets exponentially harder and more expensive the longer you wait. So this paper's mission is fundamental. They want to build a scientifically solid tool, something quantitative, to actually predict and maybe prevent the next wave of invaders.
And critically, they're looking at species that haven't caused problems yet, right? The unknown threats.
Exactly. Because traditional biosecurity, well, it mostly looks backwards. You know, the standard approach uses these warning lists. If a species has invaded somewhere else, it gets flagged.
But there's a big hole in that logic, isn't there? I mean, a species could have all the right stuff, the traits, the invasion syndromes, they call them, to be a successful invader. But maybe it just hasn't hitched a ride yet. It hasn't had the opportunity to get introduced somewhere new.
Precisely. Those are the potential invaders we're completely missing with the old methods. They're flying under the radar. So the goal here is to get ahead of the curve, to build tools that can spot these invasion syndromes, the actual characteristics of successful invaders, and forecast threats before they materialize.
Okay, so how did they actually build this predictive tool? Let's get into the nuts and bolts. They focused on amphibians and reptiles.
Yes, herpetofauna. And importantly, they look specifically at species moved unintentionally.
The stowaways.
Yeah.
The ones hiding in cargo or plants.
Right. That pathway is huge, and it's often not the main focus, even though it's probably increasing.
Makes sense. And dealing with global data like this, it must be messy. Lots of gaps.
Oh, absolutely. Missing data is a chronic problem in large-scale biodiversity work. If you just toss out records with missing info, you lose a ton of statistical power. So they used a really smart statistical approach. It's called multiple imputation with chained equations. AFACES for short.
AFEs. But
instead of deleting incomplete data, AMICE lets the model estimate those missing values. It does this repeatedly. They generated 100 different complete data sets.
wow, 100 versions.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot, but it gives you much more confidence in the results and properly accounts for the uncertainty that comes with estimating data. It's a robust way to handle those inevitable gaps.
Okay, that deals with the data messiness.
Yeah.
But the model itself is interesting, too. It's a two-step process, trying to separate different stages of invasion.
Exactly. That's key. They wanted to disentangle what makes a species good at getting transported and introduced versus what makes it good at establishing a population once it arrives. So, step 1, identify the syndromes for successful transport and introduction. Here, they compared the successful stowaways against, well, pretty much all relevant species worldwide.
Okay, who gets on the boat?
Right. Then, step 2, identify the syndromes for successful establishment. But for this step, they only compared species that were already known to have been transported or introduced.
So among those who arrived, who actually managed to stick around and thrive.
Precisely. It lets you see if the factors for success change between those stages.
And what kind of information did they feed into these models? What predicts success?
2 main types of data. First, the intrinsic stuff. Life history and ecological traits. You know, body size, how many offspring they have, diet, things like that.
Species biology.
Yeah. And second, what they term macroecological patterns.
Macroecological patterns. Can you break that down simply?
Sure. Think bigger picture, like characteristics of the species' existence on a larger scale. Things like how big its native geographic range is, how common is it within that range, and crucially, how well does it tolerate habitats disturbed by humans? Does it hang out where we are?
Got it. So not just the organism, but its place in the wider world, especially concerning humans. Okay, so let's get to the findings. Stage 1, transport and introduction. Who makes a good hitchhiker?
This is a really striking result. Those macroecological patterns absolutely dominated. They were much, much better predictors than the biological traits alone.
Really? So it's more about where and how they live than their specific biology for this first step.
Largely, yes. The species most likely to be accidentally transported tend to be, number one, common in their native range, just lots of them around. Number two, they thrive in human-disturbed habitats. They're comfortable around us. And number three, their native distribution overlaps significantly with ports or major transport hubs, places with lots of outgoing trade or passengers.
Huh. It's almost depressingly simple then. If there are lots of you, you don't mind human mess, and you live near the docks or the airport.
Your odds of getting swept up in global transport go way up. It's basically probability, high abundance, plus access to the transport network.
Okay, so that's getting there.
Mm-hmm.
But what about setting up shop? Stage 2, establishment. Did the important factors change?
They did. Here, the biological traits started to play a much bigger role, although the macroecological patterns were still important. Actually, the models that performed best used a combination and optimal mix of both traits and those large-scale patterns.
So what specific syndromes predicted successful establishment?
Okay, key factors were large body size or mass. Also, being a habitat generalist, not too picky about where you live. High tolerance to human disturbance was still important, just like in the transport stage. And having a large native geographic range.
The large body size one feels a bit surprising. Often you think of small, fast reproducing things as invaders. Why would being big help when you're starting with just a few individuals?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point they make. It seems counterintuitive at first. But the researchers suggest large body size often correlates with a slow life strategy.
Slow life strategy, meaning
Meaning they invest more in survival, live longer, maybe reproduce less often, but more reliably over time. They prioritize future reproduction.
okay, not putting all their eggs in one basket each year.
Exactly. Small, fast-reproducing species might boom quickly, but they can also crash quickly if conditions fluctuate, especially when the founding population is tiny and vulnerable. These larger, slower species are like long-term investors. They can kind of ride out temporary bad conditions, bed hedging their reproductive success over a longer lifespan.
Yeah.
This really helps when you're trying to establish from just a few founders.
So being big and slow makes you more resilient in those critical early stages, like an endurance runner, not a sprinter.
That's a great way to put it. It's about persistence.
Okay, so armed with this two-stage model and these identified syndromes, what did this study actually forecast? Which species should we be worried about?
Well, they ran the numbers globally. The model flagged 160 species that don't have any known invasion history yet, but scored high on the risk of being transported. These are the potential invaders.
160 species currently flying under the radar.
Yep. And then among those, they identified 57 species as being high invasion risk. These scored high not just for transport, but also for establishment potential.
And what kinds of species were they?
It broke down to 9 frogs, 45 lizards, and 3 snakes, all currently without a history of invasion, but looking risky according to the model.
That number, 57 high-risk species.
Yeah.
It really reframes the scale of the potential problem, doesn't it? Especially compared to older ideas.
It does. Think about the classic tens rule in invasion biology.
Right, the one that says maybe 10% of introduced species establish and 10% of those become pests. So like 1% overall success.
Exactly. This model predicts much higher success rates, particularly for establishment among those species that do get transported. Their model suggested establishment success rates between roughly 16% and almost 45%.
Wow, that's way higher than 10%. It suggests maybe it's getting easier for species to invade, or that we're moving the right kinds of species more often.
Could be both. It definitely indicates the problem might be worse, or at least the success rate higher than that old rule of thumb suggested. The invasion process might be becoming more efficient.
But the most incredible part of this study, for me, is the timing. The validation that happened almost immediately after they finished the analysis.
Oh, it's amazing. You couldn't script it better. Literally days after they finalized their risk scores and predictions.
What happened?
An independent report came out. It documented a newly discovered introduced population of one of the species the model had just flagged as high risk.
Which species was it?
The Caspian bent-toed gecko, Teniodactylus caspius. It was found having established itself in the country of Georgia. It had no prior invasion history recorded anywhere.
Unreal. So the model predicted it, and boom, almost instantly, real-world evidence pops up confirming it's actually happening.
Yeah, it's about as close to real-time validation as you can get in this field. It powerfully suggests the tool really works.
So what does this mean for actual biosecurity, for the people trying to prevent these invasions?
Well, it's potentially transformative. This tool gives agencies a way to look beyond just the usual suspects, the species with a known track record. They can now incorporate species with no invasion history into their risk assessments and warning lists.
And prioritize based on the risk score. The model gives a score from 0 to 100.
Exactly. It provides a quantitative confidence level. So nations can use these scores to focus their preventative efforts, things like stricter sanitation policies for certain trade routes, more targeted inspections, maybe specific quarantine measures where the predicted risk is highest.
Making prevention much more targeted and efficient, instead of trying to boil the ocean.
Precisely. Better allocation of limited resources.
Are there hurdles to using this approach for other types of animals? Say, insects or mammals or plants, or even other reptiles like turtles?
There are limitations, yes. The biggest one right now is probably data availability. For this study on amphibians and reptiles, there was enough reasonably good data on past invasions, who got transported, who established to train the models effectively. But for other groups like, say, salamanders or freshwater turtles or maybe even plants or insects, getting that consistent, high-quality invasion history data on a global scale is much harder. The model needs that historical data to learn the patterns, the syndromes.
So the framework is there, but we need better baseline data for some groups to apply it effectively.
That's the main bottleneck for expanding it right now.
And this isn't a one-and-done tool, is it? The world keeps changing.
Absolutely not. That's a critical point. Species taxonomy gets revised. We learn more about where species actually live. Global trade routes shift. Climate change affects ranges.
Everything's dynamic.
Everything. So the model, the predictions, they have to be regularly updated. The tool needs to be rerun periodically with the latest data to stay accurate and relevant. It's a living assessment, not a static report.
Makes sense. It has to keep pace with the changing world it's trying to predict.
But the overall success, even with those caveats, really underscores something important. It shows the incredible potential of using these broad macro-ecological patterns, commonness, range size, human association, to advance invasion science.
Because that kind of data is becoming more available.
Yes, exactly. Thanks to global biodiversity databases, citizen science, remote sensing, we're getting better and better large-scale data. This study really shows how powerful that data can be for moving towards genuinely anticipatory biosecurity.
It really hammers home that old saying, doesn't it? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Maybe even more in this case.
Absolutely. Which leads to maybe a final thought, something for you, the listener, to chew on. Given how strongly things like being common and thriving near humans predict that first step, the accidental transport, what common, seemingly harmless species are flourishing right now near the big transport hubs in your own area? The shipping container yards, the airports, the logistics centers, which perfectly ordinary local species might just be waiting, statistically speaking, to become the next globe-trotting stowaway success story. It makes you look at the common critters around you a bit differently, doesn't it?